to announce a hike in dearness allowance, a key salary component designed to offset rising living costs. Dearness allowance, or DA, is revised twice a year and directly linked to inflation. It ensures that government employees and pensioners don't lose purchasing power as prices rise. Currently set at 58% of basic pay, DA is expected to rise to around 60 or 61%. This change will impact nearly 1.15 crore people, including 50 lakh employees and 65 lakh pensioners. Good news is employees are also likely to receive arrears for the first 3 months of the year, making April's payout significantly larger. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Those 1.15 crore beneficiaries make up roughly 0.8% of India's population. It may sound small, but this is a financially stable segment with consistent spending power. A sudden increase in their income can translate into higher consumption, especially in urban markets from retail to housing and everyday goods. This expected DA hike also comes at a time when the government has already set the stage for a bigger shift, the 8th Pay Commission. The Commission, currently consulting stakeholders, could recommend a salary increase of up to 35%. But any structural changes are still some distance away, likely rolling out only by late 2026 or beyond. Until then, this DA revision may serve as a timely relief and a subtle economic stimulus, putting more money into the hands of people for a better Diwali ahead. Remember India's iconic family planning slogan, Hum Do Hamare Do? It shaped India for generations. Now some states are asking a different question. What if 2 isn't enough? And Andhra Pradesh is at the forefront. Going from population control to population management, Chief Minister of Andhra Pradesh, N. Chandrababu Naidu, has proposed incentives to have a second or third child. What does that look like? 25,000 rupees at birth for the second or third child, 1,000 rupees in monthly support, free education for the third child up to 18 years, subsidized IVF services, special leave for couples, and the construction of working women's hostels and childcare centers. But why do policymakers care about smaller families? It all boils down to the economics of it all. Countries with aging populations often experience slower labor force growth, weaker consumption demand, and rising public spending on healthcare and pensions. Think Japan seeking Indian workers amid its aging population. But India won't have this demographic dividend advantage of having a young population forever. That's where the fertility rate comes in. From around 6 children per woman in the 1950s to just under 2 today, several southern states, including Andhra Pradesh, are already below the replacement level of 2.1. That's the level below which absolute population starts shrinking. Population change doesn't happen overnight. A child born today will typically enter the workforce nearly 20 years later, which means the effects of fertility trends and the policies responding to them will directly shape whether India has the workforce it needs by 2047, the year it aims to become a developed economy under its Viksit Bharat vision. For policymakers, this is the concern. If fewer children are born today, fewer workers will enter the economy in the future. And once fertility declines too far, reversing that trend can be a long and difficult process. Economists caution against reducing this to just numbers. A larger population does not automatically translate into higher growth. Productivity, education, skills, and labor force participation, particularly among women, will play just as important a role in shaping India's economic trajectory. Fertility decisions are closely tied to how families balance work, childcare, and income. India also wants to increase the low women's workforce participation, but childcare remains one of the biggest barriers to that. A recent UNDP report estimates that existing urban childcare services meet less than 10% of the current demand. Globally, results have been mixed. China reversed its one-child policy to 3, Singapore offers tax breaks and financial support, but fertility remains low. Nordic countries like Sweden and Norway have focused more on childcare, parental leave, and flexible work. At the same time, family choices are shifting. More urban couples are delaying or opting out of having children with the rise of DINK or double income no kids households. Replacement level fertility assumes that maintaining a stable population is the optimal outcome. But in a country already facing pressures on water, land, and urban infrastructure, some economists argue that quality of life, productivity, and environmental sustainability must also be part of the conversation. The bottom line is India wants to keep bolstering its economy, and an assured demographic dividend is the most obvious way to do that. If governments want more children to be born, the challenge may not be persuading families, but making it easier for them to raise those children in the first place. What do you think about Andhra Pradesh's push for incentives to boost births? Comment and let us know. India is betting big on bioenergy to power its clean transition. But on the ground, that transition is unfolding unevenly, thriving in some states and virtually absent in others. Bioenergy already contributes about 13% to India's energy mix and is projected to rise to 45% in 2030. The government is pushing to scale it up, to cut emissions, reduce fossil fuel imports, and expand affordable energy access. The data from the National Bioenergy Program Phase 1 reveals a stark reality. Deployment is dangerously uneven. States like Maharashtra, Punjab, and Gujarat are sprinting ahead. Maharashtra alone leads the pack with over 14,000 small biogas plants. But Odisha and Jharkhand have almost zero footprint. In fact, districts like Kandhamal haven't even seen a single project. From the mountains of Ladakh to the islands of Andaman and Nicobar, the bioenergy push remains untouched. Why the gap? It's a mix of broken supply chains and a lack of private investment. While Western states have organized systems to collect agricultural waste, the Northeast lacks the infrastructure to move biomass. Policy experts, including Pradeep Monga of the World Biogas Association, argue that we need a shift. We've been focusing on capex subsidies, basically throwing money at the start, but we need performance-linked incentives.
When we talk of women-led development, what would be your thought?
Before women-led development, we have to invest in women.
Be more open to risk and opportunities,
Educate them, skill them, not just with the domain skilling, but with language, with financial literacy, legal literacy, and now AI literacy.
I think when it comes to startups and entrepreneurial spirit, just take the risk. There's a lot of fun to be had.
Hello and welcome to the Secretariat. Today I'm joined by 3 women who have been leading in their own fields. They've contributed actively to the growth and the development story of India. What are we going to discuss today? Is it important for women's participation to go up in the workforce? Of course it is. We are not here to discuss how important it is for women to really join the workforce or participation needs to increase in the workforce, and that is a given. Women-led development. What has been achieved? Where are we today? And how can this discussion really end? How long will it take for us to end this discussion? And there should be a time when we do not discuss this issue at all. That should be the objective. To discuss these issues with me, I have with me Mitali Nikore. She is founder and chief economist, Nicoria Associates. She's an economist, of course, and she's actively worked for multilateral agencies like the World Bank. I have with me Charu Malhotra. She's co-founder and managing director, Primus Partners. She's an expert in areas related to HR, skill development, education. And of course, I have with me Avantika Gode. She is right now, she's working as Vice President, Startup Policy Forum. Thank you, ladies, for joining me today. Well, we need to move beyond tokenism when we talk about women's participation in the workforce. Now, before we open this discussion, let me start with a small note on the Secretariat. The Secretariat is a news portal, it's a newsroom which is focused on policy, economy, and bureaucracy. And we didn't want to make it a Me Too kind of a product. It's a very niche product focused only on well-researched articles, which actually joins the dot between the policymakers, industries, and the users. The brainchild, it was a woman who had this idea. It was her brainchild, Kajal Vadodariya, who's our vice chairperson. And well, I'm the editor, so it's a women-led organization. But so really we need to move beyond tokenism is what the focus should be. Now, Charu, if I may start with you. You have been working actively on skill building, on women-centric issues. How do you see policies, regulatory norms really changing over the years, and what further needs to be done to ensure that more women come in the forefront?
So I think that has already started. In fact, it's pretty much in its maturing phase. To start with, there is gender budgeting, which happens in most ministries. When we talk about increasing the participation of women in workforce, I think it starts from school. At school leaving, whether it is grade 10 or grade 12, depending on how the structures are there. Every student, of course, but if we're talking about women and girls, we should ensure that they leave with an employable skill when they leave school. Ideally, of course, enable them to complete their schooling, not drop out. And we talk about, traditional, non-traditional roles in skilling. I think that choice should be left to girls to make, what sort of roles they want to choose for themselves, whether it's traditional or non-traditional. And if I may take another second on this, when we decide non-traditional roles, they hinge a lot on technical roles, job roles that we decide for students. Is the foundation at school strong enough to support technical job roles for girls? And I'm talking about adolescent girls who are either getting out of school or are out of school.
Because until we start at the school level, it's going to be very difficult for children, for girls to come up and take leadership roles. Mitali, coming to you, you've worked with several multilateral agencies. What has been your experience? When I ask you this question, my focus will be on India compared to other countries. Yeah. The workforce, the women participation in labor force in India is still very limited.
Yes. No, absolutely. Firstly, thanks a lot for having me here today. And, this topic is something which we discuss pretty much every year around 8th March. And then maybe throughout the year, we have to keep discussing it. I think that is the first lesson that I always take away from, the Women's Day coverage and from the Women's Day shows that we, end up having. Now, when we look at the data, right, let's take a little bit of a zoom out view of India versus several other countries. What are we observing? In 2017, India's female labor force participation rate was around 23%. Which was genuinely amongst the lowest in the world. And I'm including developing countries, developed countries, across countries. Cut to 5 years later, we're today sitting at 42%. And it's definitely not amongst the lowest in the world. It is low, but it has improved immensely. Now, what has driven this increase? That is the main piece of this story. What has driven this increase is actually rural labor force participation rate. And we're starting to see that a lot of women in rural areas coming into agriculture is driving up this labor force participation rate. Now, a lot of people, including myself, are concerned about this because we want ideally we want women to go into jobs in sectors that are fast growing. So what we see today is that there is a structural transformation in our economy where the growth is coming from highly productive, technical, scientific STEM sectors. Men are moving into those jobs. They are leaving behind lower productivity, lower paid jobs, and women are coming in and taking those jobs. And that's kind of driving the increase in the labor force participation for women. What we need is, of course, for women to have an equal opportunity to take up a job which is in a high productivity, high wage sector with high skills, with high, sort of know-how. To make that happen, we have to examine two sides of our labor markets. One is the demand side, which is the employers, and the other is the supply side, which is the women themselves. Clearly, today we have what we call in economics a market failure. The demand side and the supply side are not coming together to give an optimum outcome in terms of the number of women employed. What is stopping that? There are a number of factors. Some relate to the fact that employers themselves have certain reservations, stereotypes, timings. Then there are certain that relate to women themselves, like the care economy. And the fact that if as a woman, I'm spending 5.5 hours of my day every day on average doing unpaid care work, while men do 30 minutes and keeping the economy going, that also is a structural barrier. So we see barriers on both sides.
We'll get back to that, Mithali. You came up with a very interesting point on the care issue. Now, Avantika, let me ask you, you've been, working with the startup ecosystem. How has been your experience? How many women leaders are there in the startup ecosystem? What kind of percentage do you see of startups which are driven by women?
So, I mean, I'll be honest, I think the startup ecosystem is somewhere where there's a lot of optimism in terms of actual women participation. We do see a lot of women founders coming up now. Of course, these structural and sort of real world challenges exist for everybody, and specifically from those who are coming from these very technical backgrounds. But I think what's happened in the startup ecosystem and with AI coming to the fore is that the sort of barrier to entry in terms of building something has really gone down. And that speaks to your question on, this, where are their background or the sort of idea of who has the privilege of that technical know-how sort of goes away. So I think AI is changing a lot in terms of who is building, and we will see a lot of women participation on account of that. The other side I would say about the startup ecosystem in India is that there is adequate capital and resource support. So the ecosystem does have enough. But again, in terms of pure numbers and percentage, you still, of course, do see men leading the pack.
Yeah, because when we talk of startups, typically we think of a man driving it. Very few women startups actually have come to the fore, though it's changing, but a lot needs to be done.
I just want to also, I want to add there is that how do we define the startup? Yes, if you're going to look at pure technical and tech startups, then you will see a lot of men. But what I have seen is that there's a lot of entrepreneurial spirit with women, and they are
even manufacturing in several sectors.
Yes, in fact, I have seen lately that in the deep tech space there are so many women innovating on ground. So again, I wouldn't say that the numbers match up, but what we are seeing on ground is
so
really
at least women are coming forth. I mean, they're taking interest, they're coming forward.
And Mahua, for example, if I can just extend what she said in terms of startups. Women, and you speak about women-led development, women creating jobs for other women, and actually that is really giving them agency to create jobs for other women, and that's what we've seen even in the startup space. For example, Primus Partners, our company, right? We have taken a conscious decision to have men and women in terms of 50%, and we are very close to where around 48-49% of women employees. I mean, that's just as an aside.
So in terms of policies, in terms of regulatory norms, what changes would you like to see, considering again, the skill development bit needs to start from the school level.
Right.
I mean, of course, in terms of the labor laws and all, we have seen a huge change, you know, but the
Yes.
mindset also has to change. So what kind of policy measures would you like to see coming in the next maybe few months or years to ensure that the skill development bit is taken care of for a girl child right from the school level?
So I think that's a great potential over there. Because we are, okay, PEM Setu, you know, this program of ITI upgradation, where, you know, X number of ITIs have to be upgraded. So one way is actually to look at localized skill training, right? Because then, and mapped to the kind of livelihood opportunities in those districts. And then prepare the training centers, the job roles in accordance, so then we don't see too much of a migration, and the girls can be absorbed, because some families may not be very happy about their girls, you know, relocating. So I think in that sense, if we can actually map where the job opportunities lie, and then, you know, skill for the jobs, I think that's one area. The other area is in terms of the other aspect of policy, safety. You know, the kind of safe environment where they are being skilled, and conducive environment, things like toilets, water, hygiene,
Yes,
CCTV,
absolutely,
you know,
absolutely.
CCTV. And this whole posh, you know, Ministry of WCD has come out with this she box, you know, let you know them even kind of register on she box in terms of giving women at least a space to be able to be seen and heard. Let them not be invisible. I fear dark spaces. I fear invisibility.
Right.
They need to be discovered. They need to be made visible, whether it's on the skilling map, whether it's on a job map, in terms of opportunities. Who spoke of equal opportunities, right? So I think these are some areas. And then secondly, accountability. You know, if government-backed programs and they are creating opportunities, whether it is discovering new job roles, you mentioned, you know, STEM, technical, let women be prepared to take up those job roles. But then let there be accountability by who's providing that skilling. And the whole supply chain, the whole value chain, whether it is those who are mobilizing these girls to be skilled, the skilling partners, the training partners, the kind of certificates that they would be giving out, and the learning and the outcomes, skilling outcomes that are coming out. And of course, the main one being placement, and then tracking these girls once they get into a job. So ensuring that the trainers are trained, ensuring that the curriculum is aligned to industry needs, right? And it's not some low aspirational jobs, because if the jobs are not aligned to the aspirations, if the jobs are not aligned to industry, either we'll see girls dropping out, or we will see them not staying in their jobs.
Absolutely. That is what, Mithali, you mentioned.
Exactly.
But at the same time, Mithali, would you say women also need to change the mindset? Because what I gathered talking to a few women is this, that many actually log off from work life or from the corporate world because of social changes. Maybe the husband is working, or maybe the family doesn't need. So when you're in your mid 40s or early 50s, you want to actually log off because you don't want to be in that rat race.
Yeah.
So that mentality also probably needs to change. Any comments on that?
So, Momo, when we do our research at Nikor Associates, what we have found is that there are 2 or 3, like I'm now zooming into the urban corporate space, right, which is what we're speaking of. There are 2 or 3 points in a woman's life cycle where we see the maximum drop in workforce participation. We also see re-entry, but we do see that there are 2 or 3 life events which coincide with, coming out of the workforce. Marriage used to be one of them. We're not seeing those rates at that level anymore. Like
Thankfully.
if I looked at my own research 5 years ago to now, there's a noticeable difference in the number of women who were dropping off at marriage at the age of, say, 25, 26, even up to 30. Now we're not seeing that. First child, definitely. That is one point at which we see women drop off. Take up to 2 years, maybe even 3 years, and then we start to see the re-entry coming in. Second child is the most permanent exit from the workforce.
Why is that happening?
Because of the lack of care services. It's very simple. It's at the end of the day, put yourself in the position. I'm sure you all might have children. I don't have children, but I see a lot of my friends who are in those exact situations right now. If I don't trust a childcare worker, if I don't have a trained childcare worker, if I don't have technology to monitor a childcare worker I have, if I don't have a village behind me, I don't have my mother-in-law, my mother, somebody
Nuclear
from the
families,
family.
yeah.
So
at
those
the end of the
problems
day,
have existed and they continue to be there with.
because we're not seeing sustained investment in the care economy. We're starting to see some amount of private sector entry into the areas of daycares, into primary
Setting
schools,
up creation.
creches to some extent, but these are highly premium services, very expensive. For a normal, even upper middle class person who's coming into cities like Gurgaon, paying rent is so difficult. How are you now going to also pay for a daycare? Now, as per the Maternity Benefit Act, every workplace is meant to have a creche.
Yeah.
Every workplace. And this is something which a lot of people ask me. I'll say, sir, आपका यहाँ creche नहीं है. He says, हमारे तो 50 women employees हैं नहीं. I said, but as per the law, if you have 50 employees of any gender,
You need to have
you
a
need to
creche.
have a creche.
Right.
And also just this entire presumption that it is women who are going to do this childcare work is just so nauseating. It doesn't go away. Because I am just sick and tired of advocating for the last 15 years, I think, since I've begun working as an intern. I have always said it is the responsibility of the two people who are coming together to have a child.
And many men don't even avail of their paternity
I was
leave.
going to come to that. I was going to come to
they
that.
don't
Because
com-
apparently it's a taboo even today to really avail or take that leave, that paternity leave.
See, on this, I again have a very different perspective because ages are different. What I'm seeing with my own friends and people of my generation, which is millennials, and I'm not talking about Gen Z, is that they actually want to contribute. They want to take the leave and they want to take extended leave also. But companies don't have structures to allow that because it's not in the law. So until you have a gender neutral parental leave, instead of reinforcing the idea of only a maternity leave, that also for 6 months, that also fully paid by employers, you're not going to provide men with the avenue to do the care work that they may even want to do.
So Avantika, coming to you, when you talk of startups, entrepreneurship, do you see women coming more in this field because it gives them the flexibility to really choose their life in a way, like if the lady becomes a mother, she can take a bit of time off or something like that. Is that one of the reasons why women seem to be more interested in starting their own businesses?
Unlikely not, because I think there's a big structural problem here, which is that girls, when we are younger, risk-taking is not something that girls are taught. And any time that you talk to anybody about becoming an entrepreneur or starting a startup or any of those ideas, they are very, very risk averse. So I feel like the way girls are brought up is just generally like your life is going to be a road of thorns. So you have to be really, really careful. Even if you get a good education, even if you get the best opportunities, you have to make the absolute right decision. Otherwise, you don't know what's going to happen and nobody can save you. Whereas for somebody to start to sort of take the plunge to becoming an entrepreneur, you have to be ready for the risk. You have to be ready to fail. And these are realities that could happen. If you look at the best entrepreneurs in the countries, people who have built things worth or scaled things worth billions, they are all success. They are all entrepreneurs who have failed. They have started one startup, didn't work out, started something else. They have experienced it and built something better the next time over. Unfortunately, I think what happens to girls and women very often, and this is again universal even for those who have the best education and best opportunities, is that you're told risk is not for you. So very unlikely that women are coming into becoming entrepreneurs because they're excited by the flexibility. On the other hand, the sort of perception people have about startups and founders is that it's a highly, highly demanding environment, right? for sort of bigger corporates, for global organizations, you can put in best practices. You can sort of have processes that work for women. Unfortunately, for startups and for many of them, they are young entities, right? They may not have that yet in place, or something that comes with maturity. So unlikely that they're coming there for flexibility.
If I may, actually, I think it's that whole startup mindset or an entrepreneur mindset. It's not just, limited to girls, but even generally all students. And this brings me back to my opening premise, actually. It all starts with school. We need to have entrepreneurial education 100%. Where, they are actually guided in terms of, because everybody may not be inclined to, get a job. And it's gone are the days when businesses were meant for people who came from business backgrounds. Today, it's a startup environment, right? But it has to start with entrepreneurial education, training in terms of whether it's risk-taking appetite or even the technicalities of how about, seeding a business, pitching for your business, raising capital. Or even what is the good monetization.
So, Charu, you spoke of raising capital. Now, banks have come up with, loans for women, they get a better interest rate and things like that. But even then, when you see a woman actually taking the loan, it is probably for a male member of the family. Now, how do you see that? I mean, do you see this really impacting the women participation or the women engagement in the ecosystem?
I think women, because this is, they also condition themselves, but women and money don't enjoy a very comfortable relationship.
Yeah, that is true. Yes.
And even if you feel, you're good with accounts, with the business thinking, definitely there's going to be a man who thinks otherwise and who will tell you probably to your face, you're a woman, leave that to me, and in different environments, this could pan out very differently. One, of course, you mentioned about interest subvention, subsidies being there for women. It's also a matter of awareness. Are we actually, and today, but there is a lot of outreach, but is it actually reaching the woman who actually wants to start a business? Secondly, in terms of access to capital, what is the collateral? And does she have the decision, who's sitting on the decision table does she have a voice, or is it the male members in the family? So I think it's a lot. It's very, very, it's all, tangled up in terms of it's economic, it's cultural, it's societal. But the more we start talking on these lines from school onwards, you're actually then creating a mindset of a new generation.
Absolutely. You spoke about the care service a bit. Now, what is it in the other countries? Because, women all across the world would be facing the same issues, right? Yes. So how is it different in other countries? So actually, where are we going wrong, and what is the policy mechanism needed here?
I wish I could write a book on this, but, so actually, I visited a number of care facilities across different countries. So I've visited some of the facilities in the UK, in Vietnam, in Thailand, Nepal, Bhutan, Sri Lanka. Pretty much any place I go for work, Indonesia, I end up going to visit the childcare centers. And people actually laugh at me, like my friends laugh at me, like, you don't have kids, why are you going? I said, ho sakta hai, one day I need it, you don't know. And also, it's from a policy lens that I'm assessing. And very honestly, there are very interesting models right here in India as well, which are community-driven models that work very, very well, but they require support to scale up. So the first issue is really around creating markets for childcare. That is a very critical issue. And I'm not talking about elder care because that's a completely different, model. Monetization is different. Time spent on elder care is different. But just talking about childcare, because that's a maximum amount of time and also coincides with, reduction in women's labor force. The basic issue is around investment. If you create an economy of carepreneurs, women or men who really want to create childcare facilities, what you need to give them is an incubator. That, come here are the regulations, here are the financial instruments, Here is the quality you're supposed to deliver. Here are some of the areas where you can actually have a market. Maybe you also want to give a voucher or a direct benefit transfer to, people below a certain income so as to be able to avail that service. And then you create a market for it. But if, what we have today in India is a publicly provided, small amount of childcares are starting. The government is starting the Palna scheme. It's actually spreading across the country. We have Anganwadis. They will have some creches. That is for the bottom of the pyramid.
Yeah.
And that's good. We need that. And definitely...
Which is extremely essential.
It is, yeah, of course. But we still also need the markets to work for people who want a premium or, even more premium, highly premium product. Especially for the middle layer, we don't have much right now, because at the bottom, if the government says, okay, I'm providing some creches which are free of cost at the Anganwadis, sure, keep scaling that up. That's a very good direction. At the top, you have, the most expensive childcare facilities which are starting to become available. But then what happens to the middle class, right? And somebody has to service that huge market. So we have to create that market. And to create that market, we have to invest in regulatory mechanisms, quality assurance, skill training for care workers.
Absolutely.
We have this entire, millions of Anganwadi workers who can be upskilled to become childcare workers.
Absolutely, absolutely. Avantika, Charu spoke about, interest subvention for women, for credit which is being given to women. Now, when we talk of startups or, women entrepreneurs, are they really aware of these schemes? Because there are many things which are there for the women, but they themselves do not know. What has been your experience?
So again, I would say that the top of the pyramid of these entrepreneurs and startups are very well aware. They have they have information on top of their fingers, and in a sense, they also work in an ecosystem and a community that talks to each other a lot. So that information passes on really well. I would say it is broadly the ones that are in the middle and possibly below, which this information never sort of reaches. And what very often happens is that because they don't also get this information timely. Many of these schemes and programs run within specific time frames, right? Like by the time something proves to be successful and you hear about it or you read about it, the time has lapsed.
Yeah.
The other thing that I've seen is that many people in the middle and at the bottom don't necessarily work in an ecosystem which can be called supportive in a sense of an entrepreneur, right? Like, okay, they might be doing they might be running say a platform or running a shop or whatever. They might be entrepreneurs, but they are working in a sort of business ecosystem, not in an entrepreneurial startup ecosystem. So again, the people around them are not necessarily aware or discussing these things. So I would say the awareness piece is really, really important and critical. Plus, the government or organizations at different levels are running these schemes, right? So again, if something is running at the central level, something that Niti Aayog is running, you will hear and read about it at all times, right? You go below, the state governments are running thing, okay, you may still hear about it. At a city level, at a taluka level, at a district level, that information sort of becomes quieter and quieter and quieter. So there is money there. There is a program that's running, but that information will not necessarily reach its targeted audience. And unfortunately or fortunately, if there is some information that needs like a political push, then it might still get people's attention. But generally, entrepreneurs, startups don't necessarily get that kind of attention at that level of governance.
So we can go on and on discussing about this, but we have limited time. Now, when we talk of women-led development, your thoughts in exactly like, what would be your thought on women-led development in like maybe 5 words?
5 words. So I think invest in women. I'll do it in 3 words. Before women-led development, we have to invest in women.
Charu, what would be yours?
Educate them, skill them, not just with the domain skilling, but with language, with financial literacy, legal literacy, and now AI literacy.
Avantika?
I think I would tell girls like be more open to risk and opportunities, we're told boys to have fun all the time, and somehow for women, education and career and everything is something that is already streamlined for you, right? I think when it comes to startups and entrepreneurial spirit, just take the risk. There's a lot of fun to be had.
Right. So let's hope that this discussion is not going to be in focus after 10 or 20 years. Let's make it 10 years. As we move towards the Viksit Bharat status, this discussion should become absolutely redundant. Thank you so much for joining. See you soon next time. Thank you.
The world's first biogas plant happened to be in India. After more than 100 years as well, we are not in the top 5 or top 10 countries of the world as far as the biogas is concerned.
Why are so many biogas plants failing?
There is a similarity between biomass and crude oil as such. Crude also became, profitable when each and every part of the crude became sellable. So one shoe will not fit everyone. We need to customize it, generate biogas and then upgrade the biogas to the CNG quality. We call it CBG, compressed biogas, or bio-CNG also you can call it. The pull factor has to be looked into, and the pull factor will come again when we can sell or we can take care of the fertilizer part of it. Raw material availability is one thing, but raw material availability to us is another thing. That let's not even compare two states. If you really want to compare the substrate available in that particular place, in that particular village. India already has got a scheme called Satat, under which oil marketing companies can buy all your bio-CNG or compressed biogas. India needs similar scheme also for the fertilizer, where, if I can say, fertilizer marketing company can buy all this fertilizer and try to channelize in the market. Tons and tons of kitchen waste is available. Is it available to you? That too at the right time, in the right quality, in the right quantity, and for the right price? We need to see.
Hello and welcome to the Secretariat. The West Asian crisis has once again highlighted the need to achieve energy security. Not just energy security, but the expansion of renewables in the total energy basket. Today we talk about biogas. What is the status and progress of biogas production? I have with me Mr. Gaurav Kedia, Chairman, Indian Biogas Association. Welcome, Mr. Kedia. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We have been talking about biogas production for years now, actually for decades. For Indians and lakhs of Indians, biogas as a concept is nothing new. Yet, the production of biogas is still limited. The way one had envisaged biogas production to take off has not really happened. What is the reason for that?
So before I really talk about biogas, let me take a step back and talk about biomass in general, because ultimately to make biogas you need organic matter. Yeah? So many a times people are confused or people keep talking about fossil, which is normal because it's like a geographical lottery that you take it out and you burn it, of course, after doing all the processing, etc. But if you go thousands of years back in time, and if you see this crude oil, what we talk today, these were also biomass, as simple as it. Under temperature and pressure, and with time, this got converted into crude oil. So what I really want to say over here is that there is a similarity between biomass and crude oil as such. Crude also became, profitable when each and every part of the crude became sellable, as simple as it, with time. The technology could really do that. Let me jump to the biogas, your question straightforwardly with this. So when you talk about biogas, so we need to see elephant as a whole, because biogas is not only biogas. In fact, bioenergy as a whole, it's not only the energy part. If I talk about the solid part, let's say if I burn it, along with the energy, thermal energy, I get what is called carbon as such. If I talk about, let's say, biodiesel, along with biodiesel, I also get glycerine. And similar is the case with biogas. Along with biogas, we also get something called biofertilizer. Technically, it's called fermented organic manure. Now, coming to your question, so in biogas field, we talk about three buckets. One is the technical bucket, second is the financial bucket, and third is the social bucket. Policy also falls in the social bucket. From the technological side, a lot has happened. But what we really want to emphasize over here, and this is the mistake which many of us keep doing, is that we try to have the utopia kind of situation, which is not the case. So one shoe will not fit everyone. We need to customize it based on the locally available substrate. If I go to Punjab, if I have paddy straw available, then my technology is able to or should be able to take care of that. If I'm talking about small scale biogas, and if I'm talking about cow dung, I mean, then I need to talk about the technology which really caters to this substrate. So that is point number one. But just to tell you, the good news is that a lot has already happened. A lot is already happening from technological side. What is not happening or what really needs to happen, and a lot of people are already working on it, that on the gas side, we have really worked like anything. In fact, you can generate biogas and then upgrade the biogas to the CNG quality. We call it CBG, compressed biogas, or bio-CNG also you can call it. But the fertilizer part still needs a lot of emphasis. Again, I will repeat, elephant as a whole. So that's the first part. Second part is the financial one. We'll come back to this, but a lot has already been done from the government side. A lot of push has been given, but the pull factor has to be looked into, and the pull factor will come again when we can sell or we can take care of the fertilizer part of it. I think the most interesting part is the social part, and this is where we need to put a lot of emphasis, because raw material availability is one thing, but raw material availability to us is another thing. We are sitting in Delhi and tons of kitchen waste is available. Is it available to you? That too at the right time, in the right quality, in the right quantity, and for the right price, we need to see.
So when you say that, one size fits all formula will not work for this particular segment, what works in Punjab may not work in Andhra Pradesh. Is that what you're trying to say?
So what I'm trying to say is that it's a very local phenomena. Sometimes it's a hyper local phenomena. I can't even compare Punjab and Maharashtra per se. So we need to really do a local feasibility. We need to understand the local dynamics. We need to understand what is really available to me and the quality of that. And accordingly, I need to design it. So what I really want to say over here is that let's not even compare two states. If you really want to compare the substrate available in that particular place, in that particular village or city, I don't know, and compare that with another part of the world.
When you talk about, waste as such, India is sitting on a pile of waste. Every year when winter starts setting in, we are talking about pollution. In most of the states and most of the cities, pollution has become a huge issue. And one of the main reasons, at least in Delhi and nearby areas, is stubble burning.
Yeah.
Now, do you think that can be really directed to producing biogas?
Well, I don't think it's already happening, by the way. And Government of India is very serious about it. A lot of entrepreneurs have come forward and they are putting such plants where CBG can be generated or bio-CNG. The problem over here is this availability of raw material, that is paddy straw in this case, because you just have a window of 2 weeks or something like this, because farmers have to really prepare their field for the next sowing. And you need to collect all this paddy straw as soon as the field is available to you within the span of 2 weeks. And that's the real challenge. We call it upstream. So we need to really make the technological intervention that our machineries can really clean out the field within no time. That is point number one. Point number two, again, I would emphasize over here is the open question, how to channelize this fertilizer which is coming out of a biogas plant, because this will be in bulk like anything.
In terms of government's policies, schemes, of course, a government has already put in place a subsidy angle to it. Despite that, biogas production, biogas plants have not come up in the way one would have again envisaged or expected. What is the reason for that? What policy measure is required to really push this?
So there can be a whole list of wish list, and as I told you, a lot has been done. But what more is needed for sure? Number one, we need to have a single window clearance. Right now, I need to run from one department, one ministry to another ministry. The, let's say, upstream part earlier, MODWS was taking care, Ministry of Drinking Water and Sanitation. For the CAPEX part, I had to go to Ministry of New and Renewable Energy. For the offtake part of the gas, I need to go to the OMCs, oil marketing companies, basically MOPNG, to talk about it. MOPNG also gives some subsidy on the upstream part of it here. for the collection equipment, etc. So we are running from one ministry to another ministry. We are running to pollution department. We are running to another factory license department, etc. So my personal take would also be that we need to have a single window clearance. That is point number one. Point number two, India already has got a scheme called Satat, under which oil marketing companies can buy all your bio-CNG or compressed biogas. India needs similar scheme also for the fertilizer, where, if I can say, fertilizer marketing company can buy all this fertilizer and try to channelize in the market.
Now, when you speak about the bigger companies coming into this field, despite the bigger companies coming into the field, this segment has remained rather, weak.
Yeah.
What more needs to be done? What kind of investment is required?
So when we talk about in investment term, and when we talk about bigger, here small is also beautiful. That's what I would like to say. So we need to have a decentralized, biogas plants as well, because then you don't need to move the waste like anything. We can talk in pockets, and India was always a decentralized country. If you move back in time, even our plates, in fact, we don't have a centralized shape. We are our own shape. So it's a decentralized country. So what we really would like to have, of course, nothing against centralized. You need to have, let's say in Indore, there is a big plant based on municipal solid waste, and they are generating almost 17 tons of CBG per day. So we can have that. But at the same time, India has got so many gaushalas. India has got so many small kitchens, smaller, big kitchens, food park, etc. We can have a decentralized biogas plant. Every society has got can have a biogas plant as to really showcase the beauty of biogas in general. So what we really would like to put forth over here is that it's important to see what fits where. Again, one shoe will not fit everywhere. So we need to do that kind of study properly and in a very localized fashion, not in a generalized fashion.
Even when you talk about localized, production facilities, when we talk of states, a few states have taken the lead in biogas production, while some of the states are still lagging behind. Now, what kind of policy push, again, would you think is required for states which are not really still producing biogas the way they should be?
So, for example, it's a very good question, by the way. For example, if I go to Uttar Pradesh, along with the central subsidy, they also give the subsidy, additional subsidy for the large-scale biogas plant, and they also make sure that the stamp duty on the land, etc., are waived or it's minimized. So there are a lot of push being given, but more than that, there are few states which are also ensuring that you are getting the raw material in the sufficient quantity, and they are not allowing other biogas plant to happen in that area. Otherwise, you'll be fighting for the same feedstock. So I think when the state policies are concerned, is very important then that we take the feedback from the other states. There should be a knowledge exchange kind of mechanism, which MNRE does, in fact, time to time. They do the stakeholder meeting, etc. But this knowledge sharing is something which is very important. Not about the goody thing, but also about something which didn't go well in that state. And many a time that's a problem, to be honest. And this is something, this is where we need to be very open and very candid that, guys, we have this problem. Can we do something together, or have we faced this? What was your solution? What was your way to communicate, let's say, even to the farmers, even to any other feedstock supplier, or even the off-taker of fertilizer, let's say. And accordingly, we can take the next step.
So even now, when we talk of biogas, it is pretty much restricted to smaller towns or maybe the rural areas. Even today, we do not see the urban centers really taking to biogas. Again, what is the reason?
So reason is very simple. In cities, the lands are very expensive. Yeah? In Bangalore, now we know that few of the
How does a government decide where to build a hospital, which region needs more schools, and how resources should be distributed fairly? It all begins with one exercise, the census. This population count is the foundation for policy planning and the path towards Viksit Bharat 2047. Every number counts. Every number feeds directly into policy making. It creates an accurate foundation for future policies helps ensure the fair distribution of resources, and enables targeted planning in the areas that need it most. Census data forms the cornerstone of key policies for social welfare, development, urban planning, and workforce participation. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. Data is the buzzword and policy is the cornerstone. The data collection process begins with the first phase, house listing and housing census, scheduled between April and September 2026. It will be conducted over a 30-day period as decided by each state or union territory. During this phase, officials will record details of each house, along with information on amenities, assets, and basic household characteristics. This exercise helps build the baseline dataset essential for effective policy design. Now, citizens can also directly participate through self-enumeration. By generating a self-enumeration ID and sharing it with the enumerator during their visit, individuals can contribute more actively to the process. This approach makes the exercise faster, more efficient, and more participatory. A key concern in any data-driven exercise is privacy, and here the law is clear. Your data is protected under the Census Act 1948, ensuring that all information remains confidential, identities are not disclosed, and the data is not used for tax or investigation purposes. This legal safeguard helps build and maintain trust in the system. For policies to work, data must be accurate. When the enumerator visits, provide correct and complete information, because your input directly shapes decisions that impact millions. The second phase of the census will take place in February 2027. Data brings authenticity when data collection is undertaken accurately. When done right, it paves the way for a holistic and sustainable growth engine.
But casual sexism is rampant everywhere in all our offices. You can't choose your relatives and neighbors. Thank God we can choose our friends. So you can't choose your bosses either.
Hello and welcome to the Secretariat. We have with us today Nirupama Kotru, who's Chief Commissioner of Income Tax in Mumbai. She's a 1992 batch of IRS officer. She's held many posts in the past. She's been with the Revenue Department, she's been with the Ministry of Coal, she's handled culture, she's been with INB. It's great to have you with us today, Nirupama. Thank you for joining us.
So first of all, thanks, Mama. Thank you for having me on your program today. It's always a pleasure to talk about women in the workforce. I try to participate in at least one program every year, and I do write about women, in different sectors. Fortunately, also in my career in government, I've had an opportunity to work in different sectors, which I'll tell you about. Because you asked me how things have changed.
Nirupama, let's start this conversation with your journey as a young civil service official. You joined the profession in the early 1990s. I'm sure things must have been extremely different then when you compare it with today. Can you just give us a little background of the changes that you've seen in all these years, actually in all these decades?
So I joined in 92. And when I joined, when I asked people how civil services is as a career, I remember I asked a counselor in DU, Delhi University, and I also spoke to some seniors, some retired officers. So they said central services, especially because Shobhana Narayan, if you remember the Kathak dancer, she was from customs. So he said central services suits most women because you get posted to metros and typically not of course there are smaller stations also, but by and large women can manage their home family. Tab to ye, these terms were not there, work life balance, these came much later, but he said that you'll be able to manage your work. And the counselor in you told me, if you're interested in arts, because I was always very passionate about music, dance, all these things, cultural programs, so he said, if you want to pursue passions like that, civil service is a good option. Because all said and done, let me be fair and tell you that, promotions are more or less based on seniority. And if you have, by and large, had a good record, clean record, you get your promotion. So I have seen the corporate sector closely because my husband was in a foreign bank, and I've seen a lot of whitewashing being done when you come to gender parity and token feminism. If you know what I'm talking about, you have certain women in leadership positions just to look good, especially a firm like an American firm because they have these norms. They have to fulfill their norms. So in government, I would say yes. Sometimes I have felt there are biases. There are biases when it comes to certain postings which are seen as tough or not suitable for women. But thankfully, that's changing. I've seen a tremendous change over 30 odd years now. It's been more than 30 years. I think things are really changing a lot. So I can tell you about different sectors because my parent card is income tax, but then on deputation, I worked in INB ministry. I've seen media very closely, and because I write about cinema, I have done a lot of programs about not just participation of women in media, but also depiction of women because there are two aspects which are both are very important. And then I was in culture ministry, so I've looked at our cultural institutions very closely. And of course, my last posting on deputation was I've been in corporate affairs also. And my last posting was in coal ministry as a financial advisor, additional secretary financial advisor with additional charge of mining and minority affairs. So I have seen this sector, coal and mining, so closely, and I was very, very pleasantly surprised that to find women in leadership positions. That sector is really breaking. That when we call about breaking the glass ceiling, that sector is so important. I didn't know. It was an eye opener for me and a very pleasant experience.
So what you said, Nirupama, makes a lot of sense. You said your counselor, your mentor actually said that you should join a particular department because that gives you room to really juggle between home and office. I mean, work-life balance, as you said, did not really have a major meaning back then. Do you see that mindset changing with women professionals coming in today? Now, if we take your example, your home is in Delhi, you live in Mumbai, you've been in Pune. How have you juggled life? How have you juggled your work life and your personal life?
So I see, as in government, see every sector, basically your postings and who are your bosses, it depends on sheer destiny. As I think it was the king of Nepal who said, you can, you can't choose your relatives and neighbors. Thank God we can choose our friends. So you can't choose your bosses either. So I have seen misogyny. It's not like I haven't. In fact, government again, I would say, is one of the better sectors. Nice when people actually appreciate you. And on deputation, I found that when you do the same work as a generalist, people respect you a lot because you've come out of your comfort zone. So people know that you are striving to be at par with everybody else. So sometimes you have to be tough.
A few years ago, I mean, especially when you began, like maybe in the 1990s, many women actually wanted to join the civil services because the notion, the perception was that it's a cushy job. It's always nice to have a government job because it gives a lot of headroom to a woman. Do you see that bit changing?
To some extent, yes, because one major factor I think is social media. People are very scared that somebody will out them or take a reel or something. So in a way, it's amusing, but that kind of casual sexism in office, I think, has gone down. People are a little bit more careful about what they say in the presence of women. They don't make very cheap jokes. Being in a senior position, I'm at an advantage. Nobody junior to me would dare to say something like that in my presence. So I feel that it's a win-win to have more women in senior positions because the women who are your subordinates, they feel so comfortable. They know this office is a safe space. And I've seen that wherever I go, I always encourage them, just come, my door's always open. Even if I'm not head of that internal complaint committee, doesn't matter. I think it's a great comfort because when I was young, I didn't have many women bosses. So, and I mean, they can also not be very nice sometimes, but I find that at least I try to give back and I try to say, look, if you are here, nobody dare misbehave with you. And let me know if they do.
Nirupama, my next question to you is government job. civil services. People do everything that they can to really get into these services. Why is it that the attrition level, the attrition rate is rising? Why are more and more people opting for VRS?
I think it's that our aspirations keep changing as the economy evolves, the polity evolves. As a country, as we are maturing, these are just phases. And yes, earlier civil service was seen as your passport to lifelong success and prestige. Even now, there is a lot of comfort in a government job because it's like for life, usually. You just can't get fired, unlike in a private job. That is the greatest comfort, the provident fund and pension and all that. Those are still attractive, but they a couple of policy changes here and there, like the new pension scheme, where when it came, it put off a lot of our juniors, and now they have brought back a UPS. But time to time, I have seen aspirations change, and civil services children, very few of them are coming back to civil services. Why? Because a lot of them go abroad. A lot of our kids are abroad, studying abroad. They see, more avenues opening up. They see different sectors, and in India also, we've had a boom. Earlier, working in even the fashion industry or food, it's become a huge industry now. I have an IAS officer colleague of mine whose daughter became a DJ. At that time, it was unheard of. We couldn't imagine. And she became a top DJ in, I think, NCR, Delhi NCR. So, when we were young, I could never imagine a bureaucrat's daughter becoming a DJ. It was unthinkable. Now, there's so
It's taboo
many
kind
job
of a thing.
Absolutely. Acting. We have so many bureaucrats children, who will becoming actors or just taking sports as a career. So I think it's just increased awareness that there are many other, horizons to explore. Why are you stuck here? It's not for everybody. No? Sometimes some people may think it's very, tough to work, especially because you have to deal with the political leadership as well. You have to balance that. You have to be good at not oratory but public speaking, and not I would say putting forward the correct image of what the government is doing. We have to at all times be careful about that. So uh, I think it's just aspirational more than anything else. People are finding better things to do.
Now, let's talk a little about training. When you had your training, again, way back in the early 1990s, I'm sure things were very different from what it is today. Of course, now we have AI, we have different formats. How do you see the change happening in all these decades? What do you think should be further changed? What do you think has really worked? What do you think really hasn't worked? Both ways.
Actually, not just in my service or whatever training we did, our basic training is very essential and very simple and basic, fundamental in that sense, because we have a foundational course in which for my batch, part of my batch was in Missouri, where all services meet and spend 2.5 months together. And later we have a professional training, 1.5 years. So those are very well structured because they want to make officers out of young boys and girls. I was one of the youngest to join. I was just 23. So they're very well designed, I would say. We are fortunate in that sense. And the stress was more on esprit de corps, as they called it, and more on trekking together, doing these really tough treks, or a village visit where we stayed with villagers and looked into their problems. That is much more important where character building is concerned, where getting to know real India is, because you go and live in a village for 10 days to 2 weeks. Those were essential, and those can't be done away with or replicated outside of that real life. So AI can't touch these fields when it comes to actual training in the field, especially for a civil servant. And but having said that, let me also tell you that foundation training apart, I think training is improving in a way, but also not improving in my service and in government. In some senses, it's because of these technological tools. I think sometimes you do lose the essence of what you're trying to convey to somebody who's just joined the service. I think more refresher courses are needed. And I think rather than IQ, you need EQ training. I think that's being missed out. When I was young, I remember doing a couple of leadership courses. They really changed my thinking because they kind of tell you how to deal with your subordinates and how every.
The government has been particularly keen on women led development. The government has been talking about pushing women at strategic locations for strategic posts. But how do you see this change really taking shape? Do you think there is requirement for policy or regulatory changes to ensure that the women's participation really is increased? What is your thought on that?
Yeah, there are policy related issues. For example, in mining, I was telling you, I was just trying to remember. I remember I had been invited to this intergovernmental forum on mining in Geneva, which is held under the UN in November 2022, and they said we want women in mine. We want leaders who are women in mining. So I had an opportunity to represent mining ministry, and actually, what I informed them, they were very happy to know that in India we've had some really good policy changes. I'll just tell you what exactly it was. So, there is a leading mining institute in India. There's only one actually. It's called Indian Institute of Mines in Dhanbad, which is under IIT. They had a mining engineering course, but women were never encouraged to join it. A reason was that labor laws were not allowing women to work beyond a certain time in mines at all. Initially, bilkuli they were not allowed, and later also they said that other than soft jobs, like supervisory, managerial, isme dal do. So till 2017, there were no women enrolling only, and in 2021, when I joined this sector, coal and mining, I met some women. They said, ma'am, we are part of the first batches which are coming out. And then over 4 years, I saw a change. And I was so happy because of this 2019 law which they brought in. They now say owner of a mine can deploy a woman between 7 p.m. and 6 a.m. in any mine above ground. And underground mine may also they can deploy them, but in technical and supervisory roles. This was a huge change. And when I told this in UN, they were very happy. They said, India has really done something progressive, but many countries don't have such. So imagine these women are doing blasting. They're actually there. And these are the toughest jobs: construction, mining, blasting. You can't get tougher than this. So I was so thrilled. I met a lot of young girls who were mining, who were heading those mines. I remember one, of course, Coal India has its mines in Dhanbad. I met in near Udaipur, there are some mines of Hindustan Zinc where I was a director. I met this girl, and her senior told me, ma'am, since she heads this mine, there's an attitudinal change here. People used to curse so much, the language was so foul. Now everyone watches their mouths because she heads the mine. I said, this is amazing. That's what we are talking about. Having one woman with so many men under a sab sudhar gaye, as we call.
How has your experience been as a woman boss?
I think it's been great because frankly, I don't discriminate, but then wherever required, I try to be sensitive to women who work with me, especially those, who've had children recently. And luckily, government is a very good employer that way. They have a good maternity leave. We even have a paternity leave, but that is something people scoff at. I don't understand why they think it's a joke. I encourage all my subordinates to take it. I've just had one of my officers, he had a baby, and I keep asking him, aren't you taking your paternity leave? And he said, oh, ma'am, but I'm saving it because my baby was, premature born. So 15 days is allowed. So I don't see why it's a joke that the man is also a nurturer. Men should also be allowed to step up. So I think if you ask my subordinates, they're pretty happy, all of them, whether men or women, hopefully.
My last question, Nirupama. What would be that one piece of advice that you would like to give to a woman officer who is either just joined or a woman aspirant who's really looking to get into civil services? That one piece of advice, what would that be?
I think it would be to, from day one, make sure that you are heard. Because many times I found when I was younger, people tend to suppress your voice, especially when you're a woman. They tend to not it's always a boys' club. Wherever you go, whether it's the government or private sector, they're always boys' clubs, and you're excluded because as a woman, I never network. I go to office, I come home, and I attend to whatever I have to do at home. So I miss out on all the whining and dining which apparently happens in every sector.
Absolutely.
So there's no networking. We have a big huge disadvantage. But to combat that, work is the only way. I mean, your work should speak for you, and you should not take any bullshit from anyone. I think as when I was younger, I possibly did take more than I should have, and did not speak up because nobody is there to, nobody has your back. But obviously in senior management position I am more comfortable, and but I like to support others also. I think they should just hold their head high and never give in, and always ask for what you want. Unless you ask, nobody is going to give it to you. Nobody is going to hand out anything, whether it comes to your leave or we have a great childcare leave also. But people are so hesitant. Initially, they were so hesitant. Should I take it? Yeah, now they are all taking it because it's allowed up to when your child is 18 years. So it's helped a lot of women who wanted to stay at home because their children have boards. I think they should just speak up, demand, ask for something, and especially misbehavior, you should not tolerate at all. And ask for facilities. These are very basic things. But I have worked in offices over my long career where after 6 p.m. there was no loo to go to. Can you believe it? I had to sit till 7 once, and there was one bathroom somewhere up, and that was locked. What do you do? These are basic facilities. There weren't enough
Basic
clean
facilities.
clothes for women. And it's the same in media. My friends in media, when I did these workshops, I heard of horrible conditions, especially in television serials those days, earlier days. 16-hour shifts, no news, no nothing, no support, nobody to drop you home. Quite crazy. So those things shouldn't happen. And you shouldn't take that kind of nonsense. You have to stand up for yourself because nobody else will stand up for you.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much, Nirupama, for
Thank
joining
you,
us.
Moa.
It was
It was a
lovely
pleasure.
chatting up with you. Hope to catch up with you soon. Thank you very much.
As election dates are announced in West Bengal, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, and Assam, a familiar pattern begins to unfold with a large-scale transfers of officials across poll-bound states. Is this a necessary step to ensure fair elections, or does it fuel political controversy? With the announcement of assembly elections by the Election Commission of India, a series of administrative reshuffles followed almost immediately. Poll-bound states witnessed transfer of senior police and administrative officials within hours of announcement. This isn't new. Before almost major elections including 2009 and 2014 Lok Sabha polls, similar transfers have taken place. The rationale according to the Commission is clear: ensure neutrality by moving officials who have developed local and political affiliations over time. These powers stem from Article 324 of Indian Constitution, which gives Election Commission wide authority to supervise and conduct elections. Officials who have spent long tenures in district or are posted in their home areas are often the first one to be moved, especially those handling law and order. But every such move sparks a political battle. Ruling parties in state argue that these transfers disrupt governance during crucial periods, while opposition parties have alleged bias in implementation. This time, two parties like TMC have accused the Commission of acting under pressure, while the BJP has defended the institution. However, former CEC, including S.Y. Qureshi, have consistently maintained that such transfers are essential to uphold electoral integrity. The debate goes beyond just administration. It touches upon public trust in one of India's most critical democratic institutions. As election approach, the challenge remains balancing administrative neutrality with political perception. Transfers ahead of elections may be rooted in constitutional authority, but their interpretation continues to divide opinion.
Despite the unprecedented rise in geopolitical risk amid the West Asian crisis and US tariff uncertainty, India managed to register a growth in outbound shipments. But here's the catch: The small businesses driving this growth are quietly moving away from the bank. So where are they getting their money from? On paper, India's export story looks strong, crossing over $824 billion, but behind this growth, a quiet shift is underway, with many MSMEs turning to alternative lenders, including NBFCs. Data from the Reserve Bank of India shows export credit falling to around 10,600 crores in January this year, down from nearly 12,900 crores January last year. And this isn't because demand has dropped. MSME, which contribute nearly 45% of the exports, still need funds, especially for day-to-day operations. The problem? Access. Business say bank loans have become too complex, too slow, and too expensive. High interest rates, strict collateral requirements, and heavy compliance burdens are making it harder for smaller business to qualify. In fact, while total MSME lending has grown, the number of borrowers has sharply declined, meaning credit is going to fewer, larger, and lower risk players. There is also a hidden cost: compliance. Many small firms simply can't afford the manpower needed for detailed financial reporting. So instead, they are turning to NBFCs and private lenders, where loans are faster, easier, and even if they come at a higher cost. Industry experts call this a credit squeeze, where tighter norms and risk aversion are pushing MSME out of the formal banking system. Despite this, exports continue to grow. One reason: faster GST refunds and improved digital systems are helping ease liquidity pressure. But experts warn this is only a temporary relief. If India wants to sustain its export momentum, making credit simpler and more accessible for MSMEs may be the real challenge ahead.
कई सालों के बाद भारत फिर इस रिन्यूएबल एनर्जी में एक नंबर पे आएगा, ये मेरा पूरा विश्वास है.
The sun sets, the wind slows, data centers don't. Every time you stream a video like this one, send a WhatsApp message or ask AI a question, somewhere a data center whirs. By now, you probably know that the digital economy and data center demand go hand in hand. But have you ever wondered what's powering India's racks of servers? A conventional data center consumes about 10 to 25 megawatts. With AI creeping into every aspect of our lives, these data centers need far more computing power. A hyperscale AI facility can consume over 100 megawatts, comparable to heavy industries like aluminum smelters. And data centers never sleep. They need 24/7 uninterrupted power, creating continuous baseload demand. Right now, data centers account for roughly 0.5% of India's total electricity consumption. That may not sound like a lot, but at the state level, an additional 2 to 3 gigawatts of concentrated demand can strain local grids. And remember, this is just the beginning of the AI wave. So can renewables power this boom? India added a record 50 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity last year. That takes non-fossil fuel installed capacity to about 260 gigawatts, a little more than half of total installed power capacity. But here's the catch. Capacity is theoretical. It's the maximum power that could be generated. Actual supply, what's generated in real time, is much lower. Renewables currently account for roughly 22% of actual electricity generation, largely because solar and wind are intermittent. The sun sets, the wind slows, data centers don't. Can India lead the renewable transition and power data centers with clean energy? The government sure thinks so.
डेफिनेटली हम तो आज तीसरे नंबर पे है. कई सालों के बाद भारत फिर इस रिन्यूएबल एनर्जी में एक नंबर पे आएगा, ये मेरा पूरा विश्वास है. जिस तरह से हम आगे बढ़ रहे हैं तो निश्चित तौर से कई सालों में हम दुनिया के लीडर बन जाएंगे.
That ambition is real, but ambition needs grid planning. There are structural challenges, transmission bottlenecks, land acquisition delays, DISCOM financial stress. Deploying large renewable projects near major cities where data centers are isn't easy. Building them further away means expensive transmission lines. And data centers demand reliability, so they rely on backup diesel generators, batteries, and redundant grid connections. Ironically, this means that the digital economy can end up reinforcing fossil fuel dependence. There's also a regulatory gap. Data centers are not classified as designated consumers. Heavy industries like steel, aluminum, and fertilizers must undergo mandatory energy audits and meet efficiency targets. Data centers, not yet. The draft Data Center Policy 2020 signals sustainability intent, but it stops short of enforceable mandates. As demand grows, that gap will matter. So what's the alternative? Round-the-clock renewables paired with storage. Lithium-ion batteries work for short gaps, but for multi-day reliability, companies globally are experimenting with iron-air batteries. Google is now deploying the world's largest iron-air battery system for a US data center, pairing wind and solar with storage that can last up to 100 hours. The idea is simple chemistry. Iron rusts when exposed to oxygen. Remove the oxygen, it turns back into iron. Control that reaction and you store energy. Less energy dense than lithium ion, but promising for grid-scale use. Here's the real policy question. Will India's data center boom become an environmental liability or a strategic opportunity? If planned right, India could position itself as a global leader in sustainable AI infrastructure, strengthening both energy security and digital growth. But if grid reforms lag behind server racks, coal will end up powering the AI revolution. India wants to lead in AI, India wants to lead in renewables. The next big test, making sure the cloud runs on sunshine. What do you think? Can India power its digital future without fossil fuels? Let us know in the comments.
Through tiny coins, family heirlooms, and other processed ornaments tucked away in almirahs and bank lockers, gold has long been a form of savings for Indian households, usually kept for security rather than daily use. But now, more people are using gold to take loans. The shift is visible from the data. According to the RBI, gold loans in India have crossed 4 lakh crore rupees. This rise has picked up pace recently. While lending grew steadily between 2022 and 2024, the last phase has seen a much sharper increase in total credit. But owing to the ongoing tensions in the West Asian region, gold prices have been unstable, crashing at a staggering rate, in fact, the worst in years. Yet, despite the volatility, the precious metal remains a safe haven asset for households. For many, gold is a convenient and quick source of cash. People use that amount for basic expenses such as paying school fees, medical bills, small business needs, or even covering temporary cash shortages. Compared to personal loans, gold loans are vastly easier to access, as they need minimal paperwork and are processed quickly, and usually have lower interest rates because they are secured. These loans are often short-term, typically 3 to 6 months, making them a practical financial tool rather than a sign of distress in the hour of need. RBI has introduced new rules that will be effective from 1st April, including strict repayment guidelines and faster return of pledged golds after full repayment. At the same time, loan limits have also been adjusted. Now, smaller loans can go up to 85% of gold value, while larger loans will remain capped at 75%. However, risks remain. Around 60% of loans are still given by unorganized lenders, where regulation is limited and the interest rates are not standardized. This trend of rising gold loans reflects both better use of assets and growing reliance on borrowings for financial needs. What was once used as last resort asset, gold is now being used more frequently for liquidity. How do you think this move will play out? Tell us in the comments below.
As tensions in West Asia escalate into a full-blown war in the aftermath of the attack on Iran, the burning question looms: what happens to Chabahar port? Reports say that the port is operational, though the area around the port has been under attack. The main port is currently safe from any damage. India has invested about $120 million so far to develop the port and has also offered a $250 million credit line for related infrastructure. India Ports Global Limited (IPGL) has also signed a 10-year contract for managing the main Shahid Beheshti terminal. For India, Chabahar port is strategic. It also connects India to a larger trade network with the International North-South Transport Corridor, linking Indian goods to Russia and Europe. Iran sits at the center of India's connectivity plans. From trade routes to Central Asia access, Tehran plays a key role in India's larger regional strategy. With the continuation of the war, India's policymakers and businesses will be monitoring the situation at the port. But in these testing times, India cannot afford to test the waters for long. Chabahar port is of paramount strategic importance to India, and a multi-pronged approach is the need of the hour to ensure its safety.
The amendment to the Women's Reservation Bill, your thoughts, Mitali, on this?
So, Mama, very honestly, let's look at this situation. Let's take a step back. We all thought in the feminist advocacy space and in the feminist economic space that this is just lip service. Maybe this is not going to actually become a reality for another 10 years or so, because the census data was, almost like a requirement for actually implementing the 33% reservation for women. However, with this amendment, the women's reservation could become a reality by as early as 2029, in fact, in the very next national election cycle. And of course, it has implications for all actors. I mean, one particular consideration is that you need to have that many women to actually contest, and political parties have to invest in women's capacity building, in grooming the political leaders, and also for those political leaders to build their bases. And then on top of that, of course, it's a huge, huge step forward for our country, because when we look at the research, it's incontrovertible. When women are in power, when they are in positions of authority, they are more likely to raise issues that impact women. They are more likely to fight for the gender budget. They are more likely to have, a sway on the resources that can be invested in women's welfare. So I think it's a huge step forward for the country.
What would be the economic implication of this particular amendment, this particular bill?
So, at the end of the day, when we think about the economic implications of this, today, when we look at the share of the nation's wealth that women control, that women have agency over, it's a very small number. Only 40% of India's working age women are even in the labor force. Out of that, nearly three-fourths are in agriculture, where they are doing low wage, low productivity, highly physical, labor-intensive work. So it's only a fourth of the women who are even working that have any sort of real, sway over the GDP, so to speak. That's a very small number. And at the end of the day, even just the number of women who are startup founders or entrepreneurs, it's just about a fifth, of women who are the startup founders and entrepreneurs. So I think when women come into a leadership role within the political sphere, within the parliament, it automatically opens doors, as I was just mentioning, that studies have shown that women are more likely to raise issues of women's welfare, of women's economic empowerment in the parliament, and to really take the issues which are barriers more seriously. One of the major barriers has been the cost of unpaid care, and the fact that women are doing nearly 5.6 hours of unpaid care work every day, whereas men do 30 minutes. Maybe we can count on our women legislators to actually advocate for more and more investment in the care economy. So that could unlock a whole new, side of the economy for us. Or, when we look at safety, and safety being one of the major barriers to women participating in the workforce. Again, we need more investment in safer cities to create the infrastructure which is gender responsive across cities. And that could be another, area of focus. So I do expect that with more women coming into the legislature, we'll see larger gender budgets. We'll see more focus on women's workforce participation, and overall for women to become more and more, bigger and bigger contributors to the economic growth and economic story of the country.
to take it beyond tokenism, because many are seeing it just as a tokenism kind of a framework. Now, to take it beyond that, how do you think this should be implemented? What measures should be taken so that it actually has an impact on the socio-economic development of the country and is not limited just to being a token kind of a move?
See, I think one thing that happened with the Panchayati Raj reservations is that there was a rise of a class of men called Panchayat Patis that we are well aware of. And that was in the early years. I mean, we've seen it on our favorite TV show, but perhaps, and so we've all seen it. But to be very honest, I think that's changing. And even in the show, actually, if we look at the storyline, it starts off with the man sort of taking a lot of the decisions for the designated female sarpanch, but moves to a point where she actually discovers her agency. And that's exactly what we're seeing on ground when at Nicor Associates, when we have been doing the research, when we have been talking to women sarpanches across different states, particularly states like Rajasthan, or UP, which are traditionally much more conservative and stop
Dominated.
women. Exactly, they stop women from leaving the house and have more mobility restrictions. This is where we are seeing the maximum impact of the role model impact, the fact that young girls are growing up seeing that the village leader is a woman and she is a strong leader. So I think, we have to have that role model effect translate even with larger political parties. See, we have a very strong legacy of women in the parliament. I mean, even today,
Correct.
we have a number of women across party lines and across both the houses who are extremely strong thought leaders and decision makers in their own right. So I think
We've had
expand
women presidents, women prime minister,
exactly.
but it hasn't really percolated down to the grassroots level in terms of women taking decisions for themselves.
Yes, but I hope that, if the leaders at the MLA and MP level come from the panchayats, come from those ranks. And they are the ones who rise up through the political ranks, working in the grassroots level and then come up to an MLA, MP level with this reservation, especially the MP, because that's where the reservation applies. I think that would really have a transformational impact because, then it's like a career ladder, right? When we get into a job, we always start at an analyst level and then work to becoming a partner in your firm. I think it's the same thing. You start with being a party worker and then move to, leading your party at a rural level within the panchayat and then at a district level, then at a state level, and then at a national level. So I really hope that a lot more women will be now given an opportunity to do that because even recently we saw news where one political party, I'm not going to name it, actually had only 4 women candidates on its ballot, in a particular state election, and that was just this year. So very honestly, if this is still happening, the reservation will be a very important wake-up call for all parties to make sure that they are nurturing the women leaders.
So all political parties will be now forced to have more women, because they will have to ensure that that many seats are given to their women representatives and women parliamentarians. Now let's step aside from parliament. You spoke about the grassroots level women and empowerment. What has been your experience on the ground? I mean, do you think in states like Rajasthan, in other states, Madhya Pradesh, UP, Bihar, more and more women in the panchayat level or even in the other grassroots level are coming out, taking more and more decisions in terms of socio-economic impact and socio-economic framework?
100%. We're seeing it, and I'm going to give you the evidence top down and bottom up. So, top down, the evidence is the schemes that are being formulated in state after state, which are providing, say, a cash benefit transfer or any sort of, for women, any sort of benefit for women. And you see that every state, regardless of political party again, is offering either a cash transfer or is some support for skill training or some support for women entrepreneurs or some support for free buses. in the state. So why is this happening? It's because women voters are gaining power. And women voters are turning up in larger numbers than men at the ballot box. Therefore, it is important for any political party to ensure that they have the women vote. And also, this also means that women are voting differently from their families, because for many decades we saw this pattern of women voting as per the head of the household, which was always a man. But now women are voting independently. Now the question becomes, why is this happening? This is happening because of migration. So what happened during COVID, right? Before COVID, we saw there were a lot of families from rural India that were living in urban India and were the working class of urban India. During COVID, many of them had a reverse migration. They went back. Post COVID, the men came back to the cities, women did not. And we can see this clearly in the periodic labor force participation survey data, where we continue to see an uptick in women working in the rural areas as agricultural workers, but no uptick in women's urban labor force participation rate, clearly suggesting that a lot of the working women stayed back in the rural areas. Now these women are stronger. These women are members of self-help groups. These women are literally running their household without their husband being present in the village. So now they are the
Are
ones.
they the decision makers?
Yes, they are the decision makers for their families, because they are living with elderly in laws or parents and children, and they are literally running the family, and they are running the agricultural income as well. So they're running their entire household with that agricultural income. Husbands and the ones who are working in the city are hardly able to send back money these days. So having these conversations, so this is the bottom up evidence that I was talking about, that you see the top down and the bottom up converging into a picture where women are getting more and more agency, women are getting more and more decision making, and they are also being able to exercise their financial income, which is coming from the rural space. Of course, it is still very less, it is still very meager, and this is not the kind of livelihood we would want women to have, but there is a change, and we're seeing that, and that's why women are now the priority for political parties.
Women participation in the workforce, that also needs to be increased. Do you think this amendment will actually ensure that in some way?
I think it's a very, very hard thing to predict if the labor force participation will be impacted by political representation and leadership, because the determinants of labor force participation are really very different from the political arena. See, in many cases in the political arena, we might see daughters and daughters-in-law of existing lawmakers coming into politics, right? Because politics is a family business. I mean, it happens with sons. Now we'll see it with daughters and daughters-in-law. So that is one way in which we can surely see that women's participation will increase. Also, even if you're not a working woman, you can still be a sarpanch, or you can still be a member of parliament, and you can leverage your experience in the domestic sphere as a nation builder. I always call the women who are homemakers as nation builders, because they are really sacrificing a lot for the country to nurture the next generation, to nurture the young children, and take care of the elderly. So very honestly, they can leverage that experience and be lawmakers, but that doesn't necessarily translate into an increase in the workforce participation rate. So I think the barriers for the workforce, whether it's having access to care services, whether it's having access to safe transport options, whether it's having access to jobs that are actually responsive to the skills that you have, or having the opportunity to upskill for the jobs that are available. All of these barriers, they will continue to remain until the lawmakers take these seriously. So the only way in which we would see that impact is if women drive a conversation on these issues.
Thank you so much, Mitali. Thank you for talking to us. Thank you.
Thank you.
we are going to create the ecosystem to manufacture container which is required for us within India.
There are aspirations, and these aspirations are always driven by the young. They have been in the fore. The change, of course, it was very disturbing that there was a kind of mobocracy for a few days. But the fact of the matter is that it was a yearning for change, and the old establishment was sort of holding on. I'm not talking about the Raja anymore, but the established political parties. Mr. Oli is in his 70s, Mr. Dioba is even older than that, and so on. Is it reflective of the change in Nepal, the changing demographics, the changing aspirations? I guess it is.
Hello and welcome to the Secretariat. Finally, Nepal has a new government. The 35-year-old rapper turned politician Balen Shah is probably going to be leading the new government in Nepal. What does this mean for India? What does this mean for South Asia as a whole? To discuss these issues, I have with me former Ambassador Manjeev Singh Puri, who is currently the chair at India-Nepal Center at PHDCCI. Thank you for joining us, sir.
Thank you so much, sir.
Let's begin with the elections in Nepal. The mainstream media, of course, has reported the elections, the results, but at the same time, because of the Iran war, because of the Middle East crisis, things have gotten buried. How do you see this new result with Balen Shah, who's a 35-year-old rapper who's turned politician? He's come up with a huge victory. Of course, KP Oli has just probably managed to get single digit. His party is in single digits. How do you see that really impacting India?
Look, Nepal is a society which over the last 20 years has globalized in that sense of the term. It's not just that 25-30% of their population are overseas. They've suddenly become exposed to the world. Unlike what was the state of play under monarchy, a kind of feudalism, etc. The fact that their people are not only in the Gulf, in India, but in Southeast Asia, etc., the whole country has become exposed to this. And so, therefore, there are aspirations. And these aspirations are always driven by the young people. And they have been in the fore. The change, of course, it was very disturbing that there was a kind of mobocracy for a few days. But the fact of the matter is that it was a yearning for change, and the old establishment was sort of holding on. I'm not talking about the Raja anymore, but the established political parties. Mr. Oli is in his 70s, Mr. Dioba is even older than that, and so on. So, is it reflective of the change in Nepal, the changing demographics, the changing aspirations? I guess it is. And that's something that, you have to accept one way or the other. Now, as far as India is concerned, my understanding is that people who are chosen by the people of Nepal, there are very good reasons for them to deal with India and for India to deal with them. And there will be very good via media's power. Let's understand that we are also a vibrant democracy. We have our own changes. Please remember, have we not seen this thing called Aap Aadmi Party come up here in this country? For whatever we may say, they lost the elections, fine. They won in Punjab, fine. We've had many of these changes come up. The BJP was never in major reckoning till 10 years back, became a party here. So we are used to the idea of change. And I'm sure that whoever comes to power, and if it's the young people, wonderful. Will they not see a great deal of resonance here in India? Let me give you one little example. This IT business. Where is the whole idea of IT in our part of the world? Where is it being generated from? From Bangalore, Bengaluru, from Hyderabad, from Chennai, etc. If you go there, there are large Nepali colonies there. Nepali young people are working out there. They are dealing with our people. The Nepalese banks all use Finacle produced by Infosys. So, there is that kind of a link which is very much there. That doesn't mean that if it's the young people coming up, the so-called Gen Z party, RSP coming up, that they won't be strong in their national identity, which has been a hallmark of Nepali politics, especially vis-a-vis us. They will be strong in it. But opportunities for links There's so many. As India becomes a stronger economy, Nepal has an automatic plus. They know it. They know it. Identity politics, we both have to get over with those elements from our side also, from their side also. So, you have to build on opportunities as they arise. And I'm sure that is exactly what will happen. One other point I must say, if you said that Mr. Oli is not doing well or he's lost or whatever may be the current state of play, the fact is that there would be a kind of relief in India. Because in the last several years, the general feeling that came about was that almost personally he would lead something or the other, which would, make things very difficult for a good and fine relationship between India and Nepal. People would blame China, but whether it was China or him doing it for himself for his own reasons, that's beside the point. But in some senses, he, as the identified institutional arrangement or the institutional person, was something which was problematic. And if that goes, well, many people would say, come on, let's deal with the situation.
So, what would you have to say on the immediate challenges as well as opportunities? You said for India, it is also a kind of an opportunity. Now, where are the challenges? Where are the opportunities?
Look, the first and important challenge is that, when there's a government there, and supposing it's a government of people who are relatively untested, haven't been there, etc., you should need to reach out to them. You need to make them feel that, look, we're a democracy. We understand people's choices. And if I may say so, be a little less strident on what happened in the change, this business of the Hindu kingdom, etc. Let them play that up. It's their country and they will play it up. And these relationships remain the way they are. Play to what they want, their identity, be more, let me say, open in not just respecting it officially, but respecting it in what you do, and offer a partnership. I can use an expression which Mrs. Sushma Swaraj used to say: please be very strong in not telling them we are big brothers, we are elder brothers, a nice, caring, large family, willing to help and be your partners. That's important.
In terms of the West Asian crisis, the Iran war, it's going to affect the entire region, South Asia. How do you see that impacting India, Nepal, and the region as such?
Look, I think we're almost at the beginning of this whole thing, isn't it? Today, people are talking about hydrocarbon prices going up. Nepal imports all its hydrocarbons through India, and the reason it does it is that being a much bigger buyer, we get a finer price than what they would get. So they will also face the consequences of that. No doubt about that at all. Nepal has a huge diaspora in Qatar, in the UAE, in Bahrain, in all of these places. If those economies, those societies start having major impacts, will it not impact the Nepalese economy? Hugely it will impact. After all, when in COVID, those economies kind of shut down or went through lockdown, the Nepalese economy suffered hugely because it is largely dependent on remittances from there. So India, on the other hand, becomes a place which is you've known from forever. You know it's available. It may not have that same kind of accelerated abilities as perhaps the West Asia or anywhere else, but it is a place where you can turn to in the times of need. And always been there for Nepal. So Nepalese have right to work in India. They will take advantage of that. Will we get some benefits out of that? Let's have a look. But let's hope actually that the Middle East crisis, no matter how difficult it looks, gets tided over, because that's in our interest, in the interest of Nepal and of course the region.
Talking about South Asia, do you see this crisis really binding South Asia as a force? Do you see BBIN, BIMSTEC, these blocks coming up in a new way?
I'm not sure about all that at all. Look, in various senses, multilateralism, even plurilateralism, is taking quite a hit. Everyone's in it for himself, and rightly so. What else do we do about it? The change in Bangladesh should give an impetus to relationships with Bangladesh, and through Bangladesh with BBIN, BIMSTEC, and each of these things. The Nepalese are an integral part of that. I'm sure they would have a certain interest in it. But let's remember, there is Myanmar. There's Thailand at the other side on all of these particular things. BBIN, possibilities, but it really hasn't gone any serious places, isn't it? BIMSTEC, you have a secretariat, you have various things. But are they really, pulling their weight? The answer is no, they haven't. But we all need to try and see what we can do, both bilaterally and in terms of such kinds of regional cooperation, because it's in everybody's interest. I believe very strongly in India's interest.
What do you think India's Nepal policy should be now, considering there's a new government? Do you think it needs to really make changes in its Nepal policy?
Look, I don't know about new government, etc. You are the one who's mentioning all this, but India has a relationship policy with Nepal. We have civilizational links, we have huge economic links. Now the huge hydrocarbon links that are going to come about, and so therefore, what do you have to do? You should engage with the government. My own personal belief is very strong. No matter that there may be a bit of a generational difference, but the fact is there are people who are coming up through the political process. We have strong quotients, equities in political processes. You engage with people politically, there will be problems, they can be ironed out. You find ways and means of doing things. A degree of competition, there's nothing wrong in that. But build this relationship, a huge, large country like India, to have a country like Nepal, a neighbor, much smaller, but strategically located and very importantly located, a relationship with their people is of particular interest, because at the end of the day, it's people who matter.
Right, sir. Thank you for your insights. Hope to see you soon again. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
This is not a panic situation, although it seems like a big panic. The market always reacts in a panic mode because crude markets are a combination of just not physical markets, but also financial market disruption in terms of supply chain disruption. Oil prices will spike. This will have a supply shock. There will be transient shocks that we're talking about, which will be significant. It will have some impact on the inflation probably, right, as it flows downstream. Be about 3 to 4 months, right, of reserves is highly likely, if at all we need to touch it.
India really having other markets, diversified markets from where it can actually source oil?
A more diversified basket today. Having said that, and it can explore furthermore unlikely that you will have an extended period of standoff, which can cripple the global economy.
Hello and welcome to the Secretariat. Well, we've seen what's happening in West Asia. For the entire world, this is obviously something to be concerned about, especially for India, for China, the countries that have been importing energy, oil, LNG, everything as such. Thank you for joining, Atanu. Great to have you on our show. Let's start with the macro perspective. Oil prices have started to go up. Nobody had expected oil prices to firm to this level. Where do you see prices really going?
Yes, so this is an unusual situation, right? If you look at the disruption that has happened in terms of the oil supplies and the oil supply chains, rather, not oil supplies, in the global oil supply, oil markets, it's certainly a significant what we call development. And so it'll certainly have the first effect order on prices, right? And typically for such geopolitical, geographical disruptions of this magnitude, which has been unprecedented, quite frankly, the scale of magnitude, the scale of disruption in terms of supply chain disruption, oil prices will spike. And that's what started happening. Went off to close to $120 per barrel, right? Dropped back based on the mitigation messages that were given through the release of oil, about probably 400 million barrels, right, by IEA through the G7 SPR reserves. So that soothed it a little bit, so it's pulled back. So all in all, this will have a supply shock. It'll have a price shock. But again, unless something very unusual happens in terms of longevity of the geopolitical situation for months, this will be a spike. It'll temper down over time, right? And that's what has happened in all geopolitical situations. So don't be surprised if we have further temporary spikes of maybe $125, $130, maybe $135. So they're all possible. But in all likelihood, those will be transient in the sense that they will not hold for months, right, and on. And so therefore, the net effect on the economy with such a transient spike over a short period of time will be modest, right, in terms of India, for that matter, in terms of China, the Japan and Korea, which are the most exposed.
Now, talking about oil supplies, oil production, reports have suggested that several oil fields, oil production might now be hampered. How do you see supply and demand panning out in the coming months?
Yeah, so if you look at the oil supply and demand, about 102, 103 million barrels per day is generally the demand, and that's pretty much been supplied by, the different regions of the world. There is excess capacity, first of all, okay? We have about 3 to 4 million barrels of excess capacity in the world, right? Especially through opaque nations that can come into the market, right? So I think what's going to happen is that you will see quite a bit of the supplies being rerouted in that region, in the Gulf region, especially from Saudi Arabia and from UAE, to the supply pipelines which take the oil from Ras Tuna, which is on the Gulf of Persian Gulf, off to the Red Sea, right, on the Yanbu terminal, which will release quite a bit of what they call supply bottlenecks, hopefully. 3 to 4 million barrels out. But still, what we call the basic bottleneck remains, right? And so that'll relieve some. And then, of course, you've got other suppliers like, Guyana and Brazil, which will give some modest supplies coming in, right? That can relieve some supply challenges. Canada might come in, right? It's possible, right? Canada has got about a million barrels of possibility of West Canadian Select, WCS as they call it. That kind of flow in. So I think some amount of supply will balance and get rerouted, right? And spare capacity is going to be deployed. There's also spare capacity that can come in from the US shale reserves, right? So there's a lot of US shale that can come up in pretty quick time period, right? In terms of quick time, in terms of the deployment. There's something called the drilling but incomplete fields in shale, which is there's drilled, but it's still not there because the price is not there, so they don't want to deploy it. So that will probably get, if deployed, 0.5 million barrels to a million. So I think a million barrels of oil over the next 6 to 8 weeks. So if you look at it, there is supply resilience to a fair degree, right? That can be deployed. And then of course, there's the whole thing of the SPR there is, right? So if you look at transient disruptions, you've got fairly significant SPR, the strategic petroleum reserves across different nations, especially the G7 nations have got about 1.4 billion, 1.5 billion barrels or something of that sort, which China, and China has got another 1.2. India is low, but that supply. So if you combine all these things together, right? Although the scale and the magnitude of the shock is very large, the supply resilience in terms of alternative routing, in terms of spare capacity, in terms of reserves that you've got, has got the capacity to really mitigate the spikes in prices, right? And of course, in terms of supply disruptions, fairly well. And I think it's a much better situation compared to, let's say, the earlier oil shocks that we had in 1990s, when these are not that developed, right? Supply chains are not that developed. SPRs were kind of like modest. Additional capacity was not that much, and so I think that we're in a different situation. And so I think, although the magnitude is significant, there will be transient shocks that we're talking about, which will be significant. But the world has got the mechanisms, right, to mitigate this for a fair period of time before things come back to normal because of different kinds of interventions.
You spoke of the supply chain issues. Now, with Strait of Hormuz being almost closed, almost blocked, what kind of impact do you see that having on India and this part of the world?
First of all, let me just say that there's generally a panic, what you call signals that go to the market. People shouldn't panic, right? This is not a panic situation, although it seems like a big panic that's going to happen, big panic that may unfold itself. So if you look at the situation in terms of the supply that's coming in out of the Strait of Hormuz and that Persian Gulf region, India is exposed. India imports about 2 million barrels per day, right? Which is 40%, 35 to 40% of its imports, of the total import of crude basket, which, by the way, is significantly less compared to what it was, let's say, 10 years back. 10 years back, 65% to 70% of our imports came from the Persian Gulf, okay? And now with Russian supply and the diversification of the basket, right, it's 40%. So yes, there's exposure, and I think that exposure, again, if you look at it, right, a certain amount of that exposure will get mitigated because Saudi Arabia and UAE and others will reroute some of the oil through the pipelines, although that's going to be modest. So that probably is going to come down to maybe about 1.5 million barrels per day. So you're talking about, that's the kind of like exposure that you've got, which is about 30% of the total, volumes that we import. That's point number one. And again, this is the theoretical exposure that you've got, right? This is theoretically possible. There are a lot of things that'll happen, right? If things go farther, if things elongate for a long period of time and go farther down. India also, you might know, exports 1.4 to 1.5, 1.3 to 1.5 million barrels of refined products based on crude, right? In the worst case scenario, if you shut that down, right, because to support domestic, you want to take 1.3, 1.5 out straight away. So that reduces significantly down in terms of exposure to the Gulf market to maybe 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, right? So there are measures of mitigation that'll happen over time. There is exposure. It'll result in obviously effects on the prices in the near term till it resolves. It'll affect obviously on CAD to some degree, right? Over the year, maybe 40 to 50 basis points, a little more, depending upon the situation. It'll have some impact on the inflation probably, right? As it flows downstream, maybe 30, 40, 50 basis points, right? For the year. But that's manageable shock, if you'd ask me. Okay, it's not something to of course it's very much something to worry about. It's not something that is catastrophic, right? Which like 1991, and again, we have gone through this, right? We have gone through much worse situations. People don't talk about it, but from 2003 to 2012, 13, 14, you might remember. The price of oil shot through the roof. It went to $145, $147, right? And sustained for what you call 10 years, right? Going from like $35, $40 a barrel. And yes, we had a much lower GDP. Our oil percentage as a percentage of GDP was much higher, 8.5 to 9%. Today it's about 3% or something. And we went through that, and we had some Tapa tantrum in 2013, 14, right? But beyond that, we are okay in terms of, because the nature of a GDP growth is very, very good. It's pretty resilient. Exposure now is much lesser. So yes, there'll be some shocks. There'll be some disruptions in terms of pricing, in terms of flow through the macroeconomy, flow through in terms of CAD impacts. But in general, unless it is prolonged for months, which is highly unlikely, right? We should come out okay over a period of time. That's what it looks like.
Now, with the US pressure mounting on India to stop purchasing Russian oil, of course, the US came up and said that we'll provide this exemption and, extension of this 1 month period where India can actually go in for Russian oil. Apart from that, do you see India really having other markets, diversified markets from where it can actually source oil? In case there's a kind of a supply chain issue?
Like I said earlier, you've got, a more diversified basket today. Having said that, and it can explore furthermore in terms of how to diversify the geographical basket from which draws its crude. Like I said some time back, there's smaller crude producers like you got the Guyanas and the Brazil, for example, which can get some amount. You got Mexico, right, which is the Mexican Maya can also move to some degree. Like I said, there's a possibility of exploring the Western Canadian Select, WCS crude, heavy crude, right, which is very suited to the Indian refineries from the West Coast. And then of course there's African, what you call crude, which can be what you call taken out more in terms of Angolan crude and Nigerian crude. US shale is, although it's lighter variety, which is not that suited for Indian refineries, but is a good for the crude mix. Can supply, right? US already supplies 5% of our crude today. It can go up a little bit more. And it's unlikely, if things persist, right, the way it is, that there's going to be any further directives in terms of stopping crude imports from Russia, right? It looks like unlikely. So if you take all that into account, and you also look at, the diversion capacity of the Gulf states, which depend on the Strait of Hormuz by a certain amount, you should be able to mitigate this through over a period of time, right? By through the crude basket diversification from geographies. Looking at a last case option, like I said, of saying, don't export petroleum products. I'm just saying that's the worst case option. If you do that, don't. There goes. If you do that, 1.3 million barrels come out straight away, right, into your basket, because a lot of crudes that we import, essentially we refine and export to what you call countries like Africa and some parts of Europe. So that's the way. So if you take all this into account, and I'm not talking about the SPR of India, that's a separate piece. So if you diversify, you've got opportunity for diversification of crude basket over a period of time. You have got rerouting that's going to happen to some degree. You have got the worst case, what you call possibility or safety valve of what you call looking at the exports that are there, which can be gradually reduced, which adds directly. So all in all, it's not a panic. It's a very worrisome situation, but it's not a panic mode situation that people should react to. And unfortunately, the market reacts that way. The market always reacts in a panic mode because crude markets are a combination of just not physical markets, but also financial markets, right? And so the financial markets look at, oh my God, what the tail risks could be, what the worst case risk scenario could be, and they price that in, right, into the into the crude instruments, like the trades that they execute, and that drives the price further up. Also, not to say that because of panic driven situation there could be hoarding, right, that happens by traders, and so I think all in all, those are the signals that drive the pricing, but that's different from actually what happens physically, right? And so if you reconcile both of them, you'll see that doesn't look to be that kind of a panic situation, although the scale and degree is enormous in terms of the impact that can potentially happen. Yes, if this continues for 6 months, it's not only India, everybody's dead. So that's unlikely, because if that kind of elongation proceeds and the impact on the economy, global economy, is catastrophic, nations will step in, right, in some form, right? Either naval measures to have corridors, Fifth Fleet US driving the corridors in the Hormuz to escort tankers out, a withdrawal, so I think it's a self-correcting system if you look at it, right? That's what I'm saying, and it's unlikely. So anything is possible, but it's unlikely that you will have an extended period of standoff, which can cripple the global economy. All it's going to do is going to really spike the price for some time till the supply chains adjust, because it takes time for the supply chains to adjust, right? And negotiations happen, things mitigate out over a period of time, and normalizes over the longer period over the year. So that's the likely what you call scenario in terms of what's going to emerge.
You spoke of strategic reserves. Now, India's is pretty low compared to China, compared to other several other countries. Do you see that being a kind of a cause for concern?
Not really in terms of the immediate term, but certainly something to look into in terms of what we can do in the SPR in terms of its expansion. And the reason is following. If you look at it, we got about 40 million barrels, right, approximately, of SPR. Apart from that, there's all the commercial reserves. All the refiners, they have commercial reserves that they keep. Maybe about 20, 30 million barrels out there, right? So take about 60 million barrels, which is releasable into the market in the case of an eventuality, or in the case a situation demands such a release. Now, 60 million barrels, people kind of say, okay, 60 million barrels, I import about 4.5 to 5 million barrels per day. That's like, 20, 25 days of reserves. Well, that's not true, right? Because the dependent part of the imports is 2 million barrels, right? 2 million barrels probably, which is from the Gulf of Hormuz, right? Which is through that strait, which is from the Middle East. 2 million barrels is 40%. And of course, after rerouting and things of that sort, you're probably going to be at 1.5, 1.4 million barrels. So if you take 60 million barrels, right, and you say, okay, 1.5 million barrels, it's about 60 days, for 45 to 50, 40 to 60 days that you got. But that again doesn't take into account that I have the export valve, which I can use as a buffer, right? We're going to stop, it'll go to 0.5. That goes to then, 120 days, right? So you can play that buffer out using other levers to a large degree in terms of how much lead time you have before you run out, if you want to look at it from that perspective. So depending upon how you use the export levers, right, how things get rerouted over a period of 2 to 4 or 5 weeks in terms of capacity coming from other places to fill in the disruption that has been caused, rerouting of Saudi Arabia and UAE of the crude coming to India via the pipelines to the Red Sea, for example, instead of what you call the Gulf of Hormuz. All these things have an effect, right? And these are all levers that change the dynamics of the buffer. And so I'm saying that, it's reasonable to assume based on these levers and the buffer in conjunction you look at, probably about 3 to 4 months, right, of reserves is highly, highly likely, if at all we need to touch it. I don't think we need to touch it, quite frankly, if you ask me, right? There could be a reason, but it's unlikely, because already if you look at it, IEA is going to release 400 million barrels approximately. So that has got an impact directly on the market supply, right? Global markets, right? So they release, in their countries, but that automatically balances the supply, and supply becomes more available for countries like India and others who don't have that kind of buffers. And so you don't have to touch that till it becomes an extreme situation, which is unlikely at this point of time, So yes. So having said that, 40 million barrels is SPR. I think we should take it to probably 150 million barrels, in terms of just as a better measure of safety. Gives you much more what you call breathing time and negotiating time. If it comes to that situation, gives you just longer what you call window. Reduces that what you call as a tail risk, right, that is perceived that India might have. And there's an impact on the markets in terms of the macroeconomy and the exchange rates and GAD and all that kind of stuff over time. So I think buffer has an impact psychologically, but really it doesn't impact that much at this point of time. And China, for example, has got a much larger buffer, of course, between its commercial and the SPR, probably about 800 million barrels to 1 billion barrels, significantly high, but the consumption of China is also very high, 16 million barrels a day compared to about 5 million barrels for India, right? So again, the buffers are mechanisms to even this whole thing out, right, in the short term, unlikely to be used in India. As other buffers, which are much larger, come into play, if at all, which I think it will be, like I said, in G7. And so I think that's the situation, that we have in terms of the SPR and its potential for release, if at all, the situation turns towards that.
Right, Atanu. Thank you for talking to us. And what you said not everything is lost. There's, of course, the situation is worrisome, but no need to really press the panic button yet. Thank you for joining us. See you soon. Thank you.
Skipping traffic jams in Delhi and Mumbai? Not with a cab, but with an AI powered air taxi. India's eVTOL revolution is here and it's gaining momentum. At the recent India AI Impact Summit 2026, amid all the chaos and traffic and queues, one futuristic innovation stole the spotlight. India's first AI powered eVTOL, developed by ePlane Company in collaboration with IIT Madras. Think of eVTOLs as flying air taxis. They take off vertically, land vertically, and promise to slash urban congestion. States are already racing. Andhra Pradesh is building a 1,300 crore sky factory with Sala Aviation. But here's the catch. India needs to adopt a national regulatory framework for this. The Ministry of Civil Aviation aligns with global standards, especially for urban air mobility and unmanned traffic management. These eVTOLs aren't just taxis. They can develop as air ambulances or even cargo carriers. But affordability remains a challenge. Officials say pilot launches will start with hybrid models, moving to fully electric fleets by 2030. So, will eVTOLs revolutionize Indian cities? The answer is both yes and no. They are a game changer for mobility and emergency services, but scaling them affordably is the real challenge. India's air taxi dream is taking off, literally. The question now is, can policy and pricing keep pace with innovation? Subscribe for more on the future of transport and tech trends.
India, the world's second largest consumer of LPG, may have to increase its imports from Russia, and this is expected to push up prices. Why is the closure of Strait of Hormuz critical for India? The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow strip squeezed between Oman and the southern coast of Iran. This is not just critical for energy flows, with about 30 million barrels per day passing through this narrow stretch. For India, the closure is particularly concerning. More than 80% of India's LPG supplies pass through this route. As Tehran closes this route amid escalating tensions, the LPG supply would be disrupted, and this is expected to push up prices. Last year, India's LPG consumption stood at about 38 to 39 million tons, with the bulk coming from West Asian countries and through the Strait of Hormuz. India, the world's second largest consumer of LPG, may have to increase its imports from Russia. Besides crude oil prices, insurance premiums have already started to surge as well. These may further weaken the Indian rupee and the country's current account deficit. Apart from LPG, India is already gearing up to increase its oil purchases from Russia. Russian oil typically routes into India through the Black Sea, bifurcating the Middle Eastern routes. A government official that Secretariat spoke to said that talks are already underway and things are unlikely to get out of hand. However, it is not just the energy sector that will be hit. With India having trade pacts with UAE and Oman, several other areas may be affected as well. Apart from oil, aviation, infrastructure, textiles, gems and jewelry are sectors that would be hit. Imports of critical raw materials will be impacted by the disruption of trade routes and the closure of the airspace. Most analysts felt that the conflict is going to be short-lived. However, as of now, all eyes are on the tension. The Women's Reservation Act was passed in 2023. The Act provides for 33% reservation for women in Indian Parliament. So what is the amendment all about? If the Act is already in place, what is the confusion today? Why is Parliament reconvening for 3 days, beginning 16th April? What is the confusion about the delimitation exercise? Did you know that only 7 countries in the world have more than 50% representation of women in their respective parliaments? Guess which country has the largest number of women representation in its parliament? Well, the correct answer is Rwanda in Africa. The country has
we have to look at the products in which India and Bangladesh compete. So while India will face a reciprocal tariff of 18%, Bangladesh will face a reciprocal tariff of 19%. But there's an important point over here. If we look at the joint statement from the two sides, there's a very important sentence or a couple of sentences included in that joint statement. What the relevant part says is that the US commits to establish a mechanism that will allow for certain textile and clothing goods from Bangladesh to receive zero reciprocal tariffs, while the specific products and quantities which will benefit from this zero reciprocal tariff will be a matter of negotiation. Certainly this 1% advantage that our exporters might have envisaged, that is likely to turn into a 18% disadvantage for certain categories. And that should dampen, unfortunately, the enthusiasm of the exporters from India in the textiles and clothing sector. That also brings me to a larger point. What we are seeing President Trump doing is getting countries into what I would call competitive appeasement, competitive giving concessions. Countries which give larger concessions get a lower reciprocal tariff. So our prospects in the textiles and clothing sector might have appeared fairly robust a few hours ago, but after the agreement with Bangladesh, they will certainly take a hit. And who knows, US might have a similar deal with some of our other competitors. Could be Pakistan, could be Sri Lanka, where for textiles and clothing sector, the reciprocal tariffs could be much lower than our 18%. The short point here is our prospects in any sector will depend on what concessions other countries give to US to secure a lower reciprocal tariff, especially in the products of our export interest. Even to reach the stage of an interim deal, I think is beset with many challenges. At this juncture, what we have is a joint statement, which broadly lays down the framework for the interim agreement. Now, there are many issues to be negotiated. For example, there are issues around economic security and resilience to be negotiated. There will be issues around addressing what the US calls long-standing barriers to non-tariff barriers to exports of agriculture and agricultural products imposed by India. So there will be many issues that remains to be negotiated before we can come to even the interim agreement. And subsequent to the interim agreement, before we come to the bilateral trade agreement, there will be issues around, let us say, intellectual property rights, government procurement, maybe digital economy, just to name a handful, which would need to get negotiated. And those are not easy issues. So the path ahead will be strewn with challenges, and it's really up to our negotiators how they are able to navigate very, very difficult times ahead. So while the joint statement does create some ground for optimism, how it actually plays out, how the eventual outcomes are secured, how those are implemented, will be a whole different ballgame altogether. In negotiations, everything is possible, but remember, it's a question of give and take. Trump will realize that we would be very keen to get lower tariffs for textiles and clothing, and he'll demand his pound of flesh, which will perhaps be much more market access, maybe in the agriculture sector, who knows? So the price which we may have to pay for getting a deal from Trump along the lines of what he's offered to Bangladesh may be pretty steep for us. Let's not remain under any illusion on that aspect. We certainly are positioned to maybe get back our level of exports which existed prior to the reciprocal tariffs. That is one. And that itself may not be too bad. But to imagine that because of the reciprocal tariffs coming down to 18%, we would do far, far better than what we were doing, let's say, a year ago, that may be too much of optimism. Apart from engineering products, some of the other products where we should see an increase in exports and perhaps going back to the levels around last year should be gems and jewelry, marine, leather products. Mobile handsets are not subject to reciprocal tariffs, so their question doesn't arise. Same goes for pharmaceuticals, same goes for a whole lot of other tropical agricultural products such as tea, coffee, etc.
यूनाइटेड स्टेट्स ऑफ अमेरिका के साथ एक बहुत ही बढ़िया ट्रेड डील जिसका देशवासियों को कई महीनों से इंतजार था संपन्न किया है.
Headlines are screaming about India's win over tariff reduction, but they completely miss the fine print of this late-night India-US deal. Does this 50% to 18% reduction actually translate into a trade deal? Let's break it down. If you think the other way around, here could be the reversal bargain under the radar. While our exports get cheaper, we've slashed duties on incoming US goods to zero. Aside from farming, this is a massive concession that nobody is discussing. Is this truly the father of all deals or just another masterstroke of the United States? After a year of tension, the India-US trade deal has slashed tariffs from 50% all the way down to 18%. That puts India ahead of Vietnam and Bangladesh. However, does this cut actually translate into a trade deal? After nearly a year of diplomatic strain, stalled talks, and market turmoil, the new agreement marks a reset, lifting pressure on the rupee and equities that had slipped to the bottom of emerging market performers, and signaling a long-awaited course correction. Was it the result of India's good trade deals with both the United Kingdom and the European Union over the past few months that bent the US or the White House to India's way?
One of the worst hit sectors in the Trump tariff era has been textiles and apparel. After months of disruption, there's real relief for India's textile and apparel exporters, but it's a cautious relief. The deal lifts sentiment, but not yet orders. The tear in the fabric won't be darned until the fine print is clear and shipments actually resume.
The process as it has evolved, there will be an argument that little more caution related to the US. But again, India, I think, has able to assert that it will maintain the strategic autonomy of its decision making.
What does this actually mean for India? It means our MSMEs and farmers can finally undercut competition in the West. 18% US tariffs and 0% EU duties are a game changer for exports. However, this potential has a ceiling.
US was actually pursuing optimal trade strategy before Trump came in, and actually they benefited massively from having low tariffs, right? So America is the most powerful and largest economy in the world for a reason. It's because they did the economically rational thing and kept tariffs very, very low. Trump has come in and he's following his own rather strange economic logic, and Americans are suffering from this. So yes, the tariff that we face is high, but we are not at any disadvantage relative to any of our competing countries.
Unless the government steps into massively boosting our manufacturing capacity, we simply won't have the volume to satisfy this new global appetite. Here is the claim that has the whole world listening. US President Donald Trump posted on social media that PM Modi agreed to stop buying Russian oil and buy more from the US and Venezuela, of course, in addition to over $500 billion of US energy, technology, agricultural products, coal, and many other items. India has not commented on these exact claims, but Modi thanked Trump on behalf of the 1.4 billion people of India for this wonderful announcement, saying he hoped to take the partnership with the US to unprecedented heights. While the devil is in the details, it surely removes a hanging sword over the rupee, equity, and rate markets. However, data in the coming months will actually show whether or not India has stopped buying Russian oil. When you talk about Make in India, it's important to ensure that raw materials are available, right? And one of the main requirements is critical minerals. Now that is another pain point for India because India is still import dependent when it comes to these critical minerals. Now, how do you see that panning out? How do you see that resolving, or what should be the government policy to ensure that this bit is addressed?
Look, as they say, the criticality of critical minerals has gone up many-fold. And it's not only in the defense sector. Sure, the defense sector would probably have the greatest priority. And here too, I quote what the Chintan Research Foundation has done. We've actually mapped out the criticality in a global scale of critical minerals. And where does India need to reach out? So far, India has been reaching out to countries where you had that critical mineral available at the cheapest price. I think based on geopolitically what's been going on, where, you'd rather pay a little more as long as you're buying it from a very stable and secure source. So we have to look at those places. And our study shows that there must now be a renewed focus on looking at sourcing critical minerals from Latin America. We've not been getting as much as we can from that region. They have a very good supply of critical minerals, and we must develop geopolitically, that means through our economic and political relations, our supplies from there. But critical minerals will be absolutely essential, not just for the defense sector, but overall for the growth of the economy.
And also, I think we should not look things in isolation. Right, critical mineral is one part. And suddenly you will realize that there's something else which has become
absolutely
important, right? So we have to look at the defense also in the holistic terms, in the technology perspective. So what has happened, if you see world over, the leaders in the technology, the lead technologies have come out of defense, right? For a far too long we believed that it is either development or defense, but actually it is development through defense.
It will go hand in hand.
It will go hand in hand because defense is one place. For any new technology development, it can provide you a sandbox under which you can harden your technology, right? And defense is one place which can also pay you a bit more, not a bit, rather quite a bit more than the civil sector for a small amount of advantage over your adversary. Right? Once you have mastered that technology, then it comes into the civil side where it scales and it actually now dominates the world.
Absolutely.
Right? You look at GPS, you look at satellite, you look at digital photography, digital communications, you look at cyber security, GPS. You can't imagine your life without this. But where did it come from? And think of it. Could GPS have started in the civil side?
Yeah.
No. We wouldn't have been willing to pay so much. But defense was there. So US defense started, DARPA started this, right? That was the technology which created, and today it changed the way we do things. So we can't look at things in isolation.
Absolutely.
So tech, like I would like to say that DST is going to be going to have a phenomenal part to play in this with the deep tech fund which they're coming with.